Watch The Toxic Avenger now on Screambox. The radioactive superhero that's certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes is available to watch now from the comfort of your home. Bloody FM listeners get a special introductory offer by going to bit.ly/ToxyFM. That's bit.ly/ToxieFM for a special offer on Screambox.
Sometimes you gotta do something.
Welcome to this week's Safe Room, your weekly source for horror gaming discussions and proudly part of Bloody Disgusting's Bloody FM podcast network. I'm your host, Jay Krieger.
And I'm the other one, Neil Bolt.
And this week is going to be one of those weeks that's a little bit more conventional in terms of, Safe Room episodes of a bygone era where, we're really only going to cover one game this week. But given that it is one of the two biggest horror releases of the month, that's quite fitting. But before we get into that, as just a quick bit of housekeeping before we dive into this week's game, be sure to check out last week's episode of Horror Bites. As longtime fans of the show know that, Horror Bites has changed its format this year, so it is bi-weekly. But just because you're technically getting 50% less installments of Horror Bites doesn't mean you're getting 50% less games, because while Horror Bites is bi-weekly, we are covering two games in one episode. So be sure to go back and listen to last week's episode, which kicked off our new theme for the month of February, which is the horrors of 9 to 5, being horror games that are set within a workplace. So we played a game called Terminal Lucidity, which is all about being basically an IT guy in this underground facility and uncovering the sort of conspiracies there within. And then we rounded out that episode with a demo for the Sweet Spot, which was a ice cream horror shop simulator that brought back many traumatic memories from my first job as a youth. But be sure to go back and check that out, because those were both two games that not only matched our theme, but they did a good job of sort of expounding upon that theme in very different ways. But Neil, how are you doing this week?
Yeah, I'm doing good. I've played a healthy amount of games, to be honest. Some of which we'll cover in the next episode we do, because this one was the one we really kind of had to talk more about. I mean, not just because of the prestige of the size of it in terms of where it is, but I think just because it's turned out to be the game I really want to talk a lot more about, I think, than I realized I would, which is great. Which is always a good sign.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like when we were looking over our planning doc for, this week and the coming weeks, it was one of those things where I was looking it over and I was like, oh, fuck, we got like 8 different games to talk about for the grab bag. And it was like, all right, how are we going to break this up a little bit? But no, to your point, like it's always a good problem to have this abundance of things to play. But more importantly, the ways in which we can kind of like give shine to certain things that, they, I suppose, outside of a demo or a brief hour or two here and there, like it's nice to just dedicate an entire episode to one single game every once in a while. But getting into what we're covering this week, we are going to be covering Reanimal from the folks at Tarsier Studios. So fans of Safe Room know that last year, I was fortunate enough to get to chat with studio co-founder and the lead narrative director on this game, and get to kind of chat about the game and ask some questions that I had before I even got my hands on it. So I'm very excited to get to dive into Reanimal this week with you. And who's to say we won't be able to throw some other questions their way in the future now that we've both had the chance to play this. But for those that don't know, Reanimal is from the team behind, Little Nightmares, the series 1 and 2, not 3, which was recently released. That was handled by Supermassive Games for Little Nightmares 3. But Reanimal is, Tarsier Studios' latest, what I would dub, and you can agree or call me out on it, like I would say that this is like a gothic fairy tale in a way where, it's about the sort of like kids that are in this world, and while the world is very ominous at the end of the day in true sort of like original grim fairy tale fashion, their demises can be quite brutal and sudden, if you will. So in this instance, though, with Reanimal, this follows a brother and a sister who are attempting to rescue some of their friends that have been held captive by all manner of horrors as they attempt to escape an island that they once called home. And so, initially, if someone doesn't know much about Reanimal, you couldn't be completely blamed for thinking like, oh, well, this is a continuation of Little Nightmares, right? It's about children that are exploring this world that is very hostile and very, ominous in many different ways. But I think as we get into it, like there's some aspects of this that kind of like differentiate Reanimal from its Little Nightmare sort of foundation, if you will. But for you, Neil, like you have expressed to me both on the podcast and off the podcast, like, and it's not to come out swinging in this episode, but you have mentioned that Little Nightmares was not a series, for as beloved as it was, that necessarily like clicked with you to the degree that maybe it had with the masses. So I'm really curious, like, given your history with that series and the developer behind it, what was sort of like your first impressions of Reanimal, given that?
Yeah, I mean, just to sort of go back on that, I think the thing with Little Nightmares is I get the audience it was for, and I think that's great because I think it did introduce an audience to a certain kind of, but and yeah, it was still not twee because that's a horrible thing to say because it's not. It's still very dark and very disturbing, and it's very stylized. It's just that it felt to me sometimes more like the early concepts of something with a really good visual style. And there were sections to it where it would just feel like, okay, this feels like you're padding the runtime, so to speak, and by making this bit hard for no reason or making this a bit obscure. I must say, like this game of Reanimal, they open very clearly with like you're in a boat and you can drive a boat around for a bit. And like, okay, so it's a bit different, and the perspective changes and stuff like that. Little Nightmares is very much like side to side, 2.5D-ish, I suppose, if you will. This does use open space a bit more very early on, and as we will get to, there's a lot of different things in it. I must say, after that opening and going through that first chapter, which we've done before, I think with a demo, so it was similar to stuff we'd seen before, but I don't know, there was the distinct differences in like the camera, the lighting, just the framing of stuff really interested me when I played the demo. And while it felt quite comfortably like Little Nightmares, it felt like the better parts, like because the presentation was always just like wonderful, and the atmosphere fantastic, but with a bit more to it, a bit more tactile feeling to this game. And I think it's once you get past that point of the demo, that you really start to see what this game can do, and when it stops feeling like it's for Little Nightmares fans to sort of feel comfortable coming into the game, and after that it gets very daring. I would liken it actually in terms of like how it structures itself, albeit in a slightly more complex mechanical way, to Playdead's Inside. There's a lot of like crossover in just how it feels, and which there was a little bit too in Little Nightmares, but that felt very much more about aesthetic and like darkness with kids. Great, Playdead had done that, and so it was quite similar. This feels much more like that mean streak that we did see in Inside, but worse. And I think very early on they start establishing that this is different in terms of the kind of horror. It's like the audience of Little Nightmares, in most cases, if skewing younger, I would imagine as well, would have grown up, played a couple of games, probably seen the third game and gone, and said, "Oh, yeah, maybe I'm ready for something a bit more. Maybe we've moved on to something a bit more, you know, something darker, something a bit heavier." And this is what this game structure feels like, is that nice, not soft, but by relative terms, a soft introduction into it of what we're used to, and then starting to sort of unravel that and show that, oh no, there's more to this. And as we'll get into, by the end, I was often stunned by quite how grim this thing gets. It's like, and some of the things it does. But yeah, I mean, it hooked me. It was a bit of a drag playing the first bit again, just because I played it, but that's not abnormal. And I felt like I was having some of the same old problems of like trying to figure out what to do next, like missing like a pathway just because it was obscured slightly, and I was looking for something a bit more obvious, which is, I think, because it's a game trying to let you figure stuff out in a different way, where it's like the environment gives you great clues a lot of the time, but I think that there is the odd occasion where you just go, "What the fuck am I looking for?" And then you'll slap your head, of course, and go, "Really, I didn't look over here." Like I found that very early on, actually, with the cinema, where I was looking for any way to get into the cinema screen thing, and obviously find the bolt cutters for the door, and I didn't see that one place you can go and get them, and it's like I was going back and forth for a while. And it's like, yeah,
I
and it's
literally
like,
hit that same exact moment.
but the great thing about that is it did kind of get me in the flow and rhythm of where to go and what to look for in this game. I think there was only one section later on where I had trouble with, and it was more of a case of figuring out the logic of it, and it's very, very particular. We'll get into that when we get into it. But otherwise, it was a lot more intuitive, than the Little Nightmares game. And I think the extra space and the framing of it all was a big part of that. I think it really does help in terms of like presenting the game and its puzzles and its things. It's like, so even when you do make a mistake, it's like well, I wasn't expecting this to happen. I forgot the layout in a panic, sort of thing. That's it. Usually in a chase sequence or whatever, it would happen. But but no, it was very quickly, getting me into the game in a way I didn't expect, which was great, and that feeling definitely grew.
Yeah, to have a slight tangent, which are very rare for us on this show. The notion that the very opening of a game is quite literally the demo that you played. I always have this moment where when I'm actually sitting down to play a game like Reanimal, and the first, whatever you want to call it, 20 minutes, 25 minutes or so, is quite literally just the demo that we played a few months prior to the game being released. It is the type of thing where initially I'm kind of like, oh fuck, like I can't wait to get through this as quickly as possible so I can see the new portion of this, right? I want to see what else this world has to offer that I found was so intriguing with the demo. But if anything, like how I used to view that as being like detrimental almost, because I'm like, okay, well, I'm experienced, pretty bored. And a little frustrated, to be honest. But the closer that I get to the finale of that section, that is the first level that, was the demo, like I just find that inevitably I hit this level of anticipation that is unfounded in my other games that I'm playing that weren't, constructed with a demo that kind of was that initial first 25 to 30 or so minutes. So I definitely can relate to that in that regard. I guess one thing that I'm curious about for you, like you mentioned, the notion that it wouldn't be like the correct way to describe Little Nightmares with being like twee horror or something like that. And you mentioned that Reanimal feels like a much more brutal sort of rendition of what they were going for with Little Nightmares. Like for you, what was the first instance where you kind of had that feeling? And then what was the moment that like really corroborated that, is like, oh, okay, it's not only that this is kind of like the first flavor of Reanimal's tone, but the thing that really solidified that for the remainder of the experience.
So I wouldn't even say it was early, because I think it's
Mm,
only in retrospect I would say that there were bits where I go, oh, okay, now I can see how dark this is, because you kind of expect a cop out in certain ways, and in some ways it feels like that, because kids are taken and then
mm,
they're back again, stuff like that. But I don't. I think there's I mean, I don't want to jump too far ahead, but I
mm,
think when you get to the orphanage, and you have the petrified kids and stuff like
mhm,
that, and stuff that felt different in a way, and I couldn't quite describe why. And it was just, but if you were going for like smaller things, I think it was just like the very casual use of like gore, like
mm,
in the pelican sequence before that, and you go in like the hog house, and there's a pig that's got his entrails just like spilled across the floor.
mm,
It's just done in a way that's like, it's not meant to be like provocative, really. It's just there. Like you could pretty much walk past it and carry on looking at other things. But yeah, it's little things that sort of led to bigger things. And in the flow of playing the game, by the time we get to the finale, I was looking at it and going, "Oh shit!" Like, I mean, we will get into that. I think
mm.
as we go towards the end, because there will be spoilers, because I think but we'll
Yeah.
do that more in the second half. But yeah, it all leads there, and it all goes there, and you feel that menace a bit more once you have played the game through
Mhm,
once. And yeah, like, and I will say actually as well, like in replaying the game, like pretty much immediately after finishing it, I co-opted with my daughter, and yeah, that first section felt like a breeze, because I knew the cues, I knew what to look for, and it was like the game as a whole flows so much better once you know the story, and because it's fairly short, that's great.
mm,
Yeah, if we get into that in terms of like the length of it and how that could be a criticism for the price you might be paying at launch, I don't think so. I think it's probably a great length when you
yeah,
really know what you're doing and the pacing, and you do want to revisit it on a story level. I almost like put out on socials today just saying like this is going to be Amnesia Rebirth for me all over again. It's like I'm going to, because I finished it and immediately thought of some of the reviews I saw that sort of
mm.
like shrugged their shoulders and said, "Yeah, it's just more of the same stuff. Yeah, that's great. It's fine." Like it's not. It's like it's not the
We're
same
not.
game. I mean, there's so much about it that just goes beyond that, and it's like, I get it. If you played the first hour of this game, you might go, "Yeah, okay, this is very much like what we're used to from Tarsia, and that's great." And that still runs through the game, but yeah, it just starts branching out in really little brutal ways. But yeah, I think the stuff I mentioned, like the orphanage, I think really was just like where how harsh it felt
Mm,
and intent, like in a way, and because it's got a more human feel to it in terms of like the people you come up and find, and it doesn't feel like a caricature of humanity in the way
mm,
that Little Nightmares did, where everyone's quite grotesque. It's more about the animals being grotesque. You get a lot of fairly normal shaped human people
mm,
like in this, and yeah, it was. It really makes those freakier things stick out in a way. But yeah, I don't. Also, just to add as well, it unnerved me more as well.
mm,
Like there were just moments of what the fuck are. I mean, early on with the sniffer, and when you go back out, having rescued the kid, and you go back out to that alleyway where you got the bolt cutters from, and he fucking comes barreling down on that little trike. Like that
mm.
is just so
Oh,
it's
yeah.
stupid. It's stupid, but it was like the way it happens, and the fact that you instinctively react to it and just run back, like knowing, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, like that. The way, I mean, that felt like a proper, well executed, well framed. Yeah, like
Yeah.
it was so well done, and that is prevalent throughout this game. I think it is the execution, I think, that makes you take it more seriously, and makes it feel, because it's not as relatively to the Little Nightmares games, it's not as poorly structured in how it handles those frustrating deaths and stuff.
Mhm.
You don't get that apathy, to dying in the same way. It doesn't. It just feels like, I think I explained it away as like the good thing about Little Nightmares' death system was like it frames it as if it was a dream,
Yeah.
that you died in. Here it's like, I don't know. It's a little more like it claws you back from it, but okay, it's fine. Like, and
Mm.
it works for me. Sorry, there you go. I've rambled on again, but it is just
No.
this is a game that I'm very much going to ramble about, I think.
No, absolutely. I mean, that's a great point. You bringing up that um break sequence, because I think that kind of like circles back to something that you mentioned earlier, which is just like the notion that a lot of Reanimal feels like a more, I don't know if you phrased it exactly like this, but it feels like the most refined moments eh, of Little Nightmares. The fact
Mm.
that, so many of the sequences that are very memorable, whether it is the framing of them, whether it is the utilization of when to have a scare, how to play with the background and foreground of environments, when to push the camera in, like they're the lessons that they learned with Little Nightmares 1 and 2, I think is indicative of the very best moments of Reanimal. And that
Mm.
trike sequence being a fantastic example of that, right? Because of the fact that that scene is so effective and is such a holy shit moment that's genuinely um, creepy, because of the fact that it's so casual in how, you hear it before you see it, which, as we've talked about previously, is like always the best examples of a lot of horror. But then it doesn't have this massive like camera push in. You don't get this cutscene of, hey, here's what's coming. It's just like very matter of fact. And it plays around with the environment and the ways in which that threat is presented. And I think that like there are a number of moments like that you might be able to boil down to being like, okay, yeah, this is like a chase sequence essentially. It's like
Mm.
a 15-second or 30-second chase sequence. But I think at the end of the day, it's all about the presentation of those moments that makes it so memorable and
Yeah.
makes it so effective. And a lot of that has to do with just like the dynamic presentation of those environments. And,
Yeah.
as you've alluded to, we'll get into it more the further into this game that we chat about, but like there's a handful of moments just like this that is presenting a very familiar sort of situation, if you will, for a horror game or a horror experience. And yet, the ways in which it's being presented is what makes it more memorable than just sort of like us describing it. Like, oh, cool,
Yeah.
an enemy is on a tricycle. Cool, you're driving around in a car and or a truck or van, and there's a monster hanging on the side of it. It's like, yeah, those are all very simple ways to describe it, but the ways in which they're presented is what I think ultimately, when you add those moments up, is what makes Reanimal not just feel like a studio that's more or less resting on the laurels of past successes, because it truly feels like this is a series of like lessons learned um, from their sort of like previous games in this similar sort of space.
Yeah. I mean, I will go into that as a moment that really sold the game for me, I suppose, is the end of that sniffer section, as you were just kind
Mm.
of alluding to there with the chase. But like, it's the stitching together of moments that like felt like small individual things in previous games they've done.
Mm.
Like in that sequence, everything from like collecting that fuel to the ambush, and
Mm.
to the chase out of there to get to the van, getting out there, driving, and then the whole boss fight sequence as that's happening, and yeah, I mean, beautifully done, and it felt intense, like it
Mm.
felt because there's an unpredictability to it, even though there are patterns and stuff, it still felt unpredictable, and as we're in the early game, I will say this, like straight away a really fascinating like first villain as well. Like the fact that you've got all this stuff going on that's mysterious, which is great about these stories anyway that Tarsia tell. You have these like skins of people, no bones, no nothing inside,
Mm.
and these bloated bodies, and the fact that there's the sniffer can basically just sort of travel through
Mm,
holes in these bodies, and it's just uh, think about it, that's probably one of the earliest things where you're like, oh shit, this is a bit more
yeah.
than
Hmm.
that. Where it just sort of travels through those bodies like that, and there's a couple of times where he does just emerge from them, and you're like, oh fucking hell, like that, and it's beautiful. Like yeah, I could honestly go for hours with like even that first section, just stuff, especially in retrospect once you've played through. That like I mean, like the cinema and like the stuff showing in the cinema and how it
Mm.
takes on such meaning later on, and just the very act of like sneaking through the aisles of that cinema. And oh man, it's a really strong first chapter. The more I think about it, I think despite that sort of initial hesitation, like and maybe impatience in terms of wanting to get through it because we were familiar
Mm.
with some of it. Yeah, it really does just set the rest of the game up properly.
Yeah, you mentioning some of the imagery in this game. I mean, the way the game opens up, it kind of feels almost like a Jonathan Glazer film in a way,
Yes.
and it made me think a lot about his short film. Jonathan Glazer being the director of films like The Zone of Interest, Under the Skin, Sexy Beast, and so forth. Like his
And Burr,
short
don't
film,
forget Burr.
though. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And his short film, The Fall, is what really reminded me of, I was thinking about in playing the opening moments of Reanimal, because, how that game opens, you've got this visual of someone that basically the perspective of somebody at the bottom of a well, and these faces just kind of like pop up staring down at you. But I think that like that is such an important primer for what Reanimal's going for, and it really is why I describe this game more so, but at the same time not completely removed from like Little Nightmares, because of them being games that I find to be like gothic fairy tales. Because
Mm,
even though Reanimal is, I believe, is the first game that they've made in that after, Little Nightmares, that has actual dialogue, right? Because
yeah.
those previous games, there was no dialogue. It was all just like players were inferring based on what they saw. What you see is what you get, kind of a thing, and you derive your own meaning from it. Reanimal, even though it has some dialogue and gives you just a slight more context, more like the relationship between characters, not that you're getting like exposition about the world or the reason for certain, any number of fucked up things that are happening.
Yeah.
Um, but ultimately, like, it is still very much a game whose world is built upon the foundation of like vibes, which I think is very important.
Mm,
And if this had been a game that like too far in the other direction in terms of like, well, we're going to have some characters speak, so now we're just going to explain everything, like that would basically undo that fairy tale vibe. But I think that, there's still such a strong emphasis on allowing the world to speak for itself, based just like how it's looking. And, I did want to come back briefly to when I had asked you, like, what was your first inclination with Reanimal, that this is like going for something that is similar, but still very, very dark, and maybe even darker than Little Nightmares. And what we were saying about, these basically like rubber suit skins of enemies that you're encountering in that first chapter, like the fact that they're just like burrowing through the bellies of corpses
mm,
uh, for that opening chapter is like so disturbing, and the ways in which it builds upon that, of like, okay, the first time you go into a room and you see one of those enemies and they burrow through a belly of a corpse and then they disappear, you're like, oh, that's fucked up. But then later on, like the ways that that compounds into, oh, not only can they do that, but now they can appear in entirely different rooms that you're
mm,
in. Like that again is such a great example of like showing, not telling storytelling, but I think also just like laying the groundwork of something that in 30, 40, 50 minutes is going to be like truly terrifying. And not, I suppose, like overly relying on that, because I think there's only one or two instances of that where a sniffer will then, appear in the next room and you're like, oh shit, I
yeah.
didn't know they could do that. They really don't overstay the sort of like scares that they utilize in the early hours of, or the early, hour
Yeah.
of Reanimal.
Yeah. There's a lot of like preamble, if you will, like precursors to actually meeting a lot of these enemies, which is great because then you don't have to constantly be in life or death struggles with them. And like in many cases as well, you can wait. And I mean, the sniffer is a very good early example of that. Like you're kind of screaming at yourself to like, I gotta move, I gotta move, I gotta move. He's gonna see me, like sort of thing. But if you time it right and do everything right, he'll just leave, and then you can carry on. I mean, that is the scripted point, but your patience is there telling you, oh well, I got to keep moving, I got to keep going, and stuff like that. Or I mean, yeah, there's several sections like that where it's like you expect to do it a certain way, and they are kind of playing with expectations a lot in terms of what their previous games have done, where it's like move fast here, and it's like no, actually you don't. You want to be slow and careful here. It's like I mean, and that whole system was, it was so frustrating sometimes in Little Nightmares I found, but here they definitely refined that, and made those things forgiving without ruining the tension of it, like, which I think is the perfect sort of compromise they found with like making sure it's tense, but not making it feel like you've got away with anything, like, and that you're just coasting through. But there's always an element of danger, and you talked about like the chase sequences. There are many chase sequences in this, and that could have got really, really boring if it had been done wrong. But again, it is, as you say, down to that staging, that production, and just the context of where they take place as well. I think as well helps. They're never quite the same. Like they're all sorts of different chase sequences with different enemies and different problems to solve, and the game never gives you too much to do. Like in those sections, it's like run in this pathway, find your way out, you'll be okay, and they don't make it too long. I think of towards the end of Little Nightmares, where you're in the restaurant and running through that, and it just feels like it goes on for too long, like that. Not, partially because it's slightly unbearable having to do that, but also it just feels like if every time you fail, it's like, well, I could do that bit again or that bit again, and it just feels like a long slog. And I don't think there's really any section in this game that feels like that. Like they're punchy, and like I said, they stitch together. And they stitch together different aspects, like in different scenarios, together in a way that makes them feel like one long thing. But you get little breathers, little breaks. The pelican thing is like a really, really good example where you get that initial chase, you get to the barn building, a little break like that, and then one last sort of like run to like the main hog farm sort of barn, and where everything goes batshit. Again, another great example of like this feels a bit more, the edge of this is a bit meaner, where you just have a bunch of seagulls just fucking dive bombing and sacrificing their entire bodies to the ground, like out of some sort of madness, and it's insane stuff. But yeah, the fact you get that little respite just before, is great. Like it just breaking these things up into little pieces, but making them feel like a whole sequence. It's the correct way to do, a cinematic style of like a set piece and a sequence like that. And I understand that's been difficult, I think, for a lot of game developers because, in the past it was very much about recreating what movies do and trying to make it feel like, cinematic in a way that's like, oh wow, dazzling to the person who's just walking by and watching it. Which is great, but it's not as much fun for the person playing. Like they don't get to see it in the same way. And I think they've found a wonderful balance here, where they have just you can witness the moment, you see everything you need to see, you can react and feel it. You don't feel out of the moment. You don't feel like you're missing anything about it. You are there and in it, and again, that comes down to great direction. I think in really making these things work and knowing what to pace and when to pace it in that particular way.
Yeah, one thing that really does separate Reanimal from, that Little Nightmares lineage And it's one of the things that we couldn't really get too much into when I chatted with the guys from Tarser Studios last year, because I hadn't actually played it and experienced this section for myself. But like, this game Reanimal has combat in it. They might be brief instances of it, but there's combat in it nonetheless. I mean, I'm curious, like for you, did you find that those brief instances of combat maybe kind of like helped the pacing, which you were talking about, the notion that, it doesn't always just kind of end up being the same repetitive chase sequence or the same repetitive, like minimalist kind of puzzles? Like, what did you think the inclusion of combat sort of added to the overall experience?
I mean, it was a nice surprise the first time it really came up. I think like the harpoons were one of the early examples where you're on the boat again and you can sort of use them to sort of take bombs out, and then sea mines, and then like the bodies that are like in the sea that swim towards you. But yeah, at the time it was like, okay, so these kids can wield weapons, and they're not like super skilled warriors. They flail about, and you don't always hit things exactly. The seagulls are another good point too, where you hit them and smack them about, and you feel the crunch of like smacking a seagull. It's like quite something.
Like in the lighthouse.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, they are absolute bastards as well. But yeah, again, we're not going to go into it right now, but I think thematically as well, a world that is seemingly like just in a violent state, it feels less surprising that children are able to so casually engage in this kind of violence like that as they do. Like, not just for survival, but it escalates in ways that, like, well, they have to. Like, this is what this world has taught them, and because you, the player, have kind of been taught that games do this, again, you feel comfortable. The only question I had, as I said at the beginning, was like, okay, so we're having combat a bit more. And I like it because, again, the problem with the early Little Nightmares games, and very much of certain kind of horror games, of being helpless, is you're relying on puzzles and luck and like sneakiness, and that's great to a point, but that gets old when you're doing it level after level after level. And so combat is fine to have, but I think you need to have a reason. And I think story wise, they find a really good reason in terms of like the world that they've built, that these kids know violence, they understand violence, and that is just an inherent part of like survival for them.
Yeah, and I think that to go for so many years the route of having horror games that don't include combat to now including combat, it could be the type of thing where it's like, oh, we're going to include this feature that historically has not been part of our design ethos, if you will. You could very easily like overly rely on that all of a sudden and use it as a crutch, right? It's like, oh, cool, we're going to have this feature, but then you start including that feature excessively to the degree that ends up actually hurting over the overall experience. But to your point, like thematically here, it was actually really refreshing for me to play a game that has a similar sort of setup to their previous games, but then you get this cathartic release periodically of lashing out at this very violent world that has no qualms about, preying on kids who seem defenseless. And then all of a sudden it's like, no, actually these kids are going to take a crowbar to the fucking jugular of whatever's chasing them or trying to eat them, So like that in and of itself, I thought was actually really satisfying. But it, again, like to your point, it is more indicative like of a developer that understands that there needs to be checks and balances to adding features to, I suppose, features that are not very in line with what they've done previously. Because of that, it really does allow you to have these instances of combat that, are not terribly challenging, or there's not really much to them other than in the case of playing with a controller, like pressing X, right? But at the same time, like it still is at least giving you that little brief moment of a cathartic release that more often than not is coming before some kind of major revelation, whether that be like a milestone or a bit of, like a story milestone or continuing the next level type of a thing. Like thinking about the orphanage, thinking about the first time that you get to swat a bunch of those seagulls that are preying upon you. Like you just get these moments that you're like, okay, I understand what's happening. I understand the trajectory of the events that are occurring. And then all of a sudden it's like, no, you just, you swing for the fences like you're in a Field of Dreams or something. And like those very smart sort of instances of those moments, I think is what really but justifies the inclusion of it. Right. Cause that was one of the biggest things that when I was doing my prep for interviewing the devs, it was like, okay, so what is the purpose of including combat here, right? Is it just to be different? Is it to just further differentiate ourselves from, Little Nightmares? But really, it's not so much like the actual mechanics, so to speak, but it's the implementation of the moments when combat
Yeah,
is included.
yeah, because there are times where it just doesn't happen. Yeah, there are times it just does not need to be done, and you cannot like the things you come up against, you cannot kill or smack
Yes.
to death like that, and so running or finding a different solution is the only option. I like that. It is just like one of the interesting things I think in terms of combat is like again that whole idea of like being numb to it is in the orphanage with the petrified children,
Mm-hmm.
and just the fact that like the first instinct at that point, because of what you've learned about it, is to try smacking the petrified children, which of
Yeah.
course they crumble into dust. And so, I mean, they put some fucking bricks in that first section you see as well. Like, it's like you clearly know what they want you to do. Like, and it does feel like a test, and I like that about it very much. But yeah, that is probably one of the most combat-heavy sections, I think. And the key thing about this as well, they make you feel the weight of it as well. Like there's a sickening thud to when you hit things like that. More so when it's living things, like
Yeah.
the seagulls, like we said. But even down to later when you have set pieces in that are a bit more extravagant, they do. You just feel the punchiness, the weight of every impact like that, and it's beautiful. I mean, you need to. I say beautiful. I know the intention is unpleasantness, but I appreciate how they've achieved that unpleasantness. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I mean, especially when you've played as many games as we have that have combat, and it's like almost feels like an afterthought just based on the fact that we're so desensitized. The fact that they can have combat that still has a level of weightiness behind the act of violence, and again, when you pair that with these very calculated instances of combat, I think ultimately that's what makes it so memorable is just like again
Mm.
it's very seldomly used, but each instance of it being used feels memorable, whether that's because it's weighty, whether it's because of some kind of additional feedback you're getting. Like that ultimately is what I think makes the sparse use of combat in this be more impactful and memorable than what we're used to in terms of games that it's like, oh, cool, this is a 20 to 30 hour game. It features combat. It's like, cool. Combat loses a lot of its oomph factor
Mm.
after the first, whatever, 3 hours of gameplay. Whereas here, like, it's more of a testament, I suppose, to the calculated length of this game, which for me, it was about 5 hours or so.
Yeah.
It was the
About
type of
4.
experience that really just kind of understood what it was setting out to do and felt like it was perfectly designed around those types of experience for its overall length of time. It really didn't outstay its welcome for me in a way that honestly I was surprised by. Again, just
Yeah.
playing Little Nightmares 1 and 2, it's the type of thing where I'm like, okay, I'm going into this, I have certain preconceived notions, not all of them negative, but it's just like you more or less expect the type of experience you're going to get. So to end up with a game such as this that feels so, I don't know, like finely polished sounds like a bit too um heavy-handed in terms of a compliment, but like it feels like an experience that is like tailored perfectly to its length in a
It's
way that
yeah.
was great.
It's the next step in being accessible. from what Little Nightmares was. It was accessible in a very simple way, like that. Frustrating, like almost, I think, more frustrating for someone who does play games on the regular. I think because it's a very truncated style. Now, before we sort of go to a break for the spoilery stuff, I did want to bring up like co-op, obviously, as I said, because I started playing with my daughter with this because she'd watched most of my playthrough. Yes, I'm an irresponsible parent. But she loves horror stuff and she's fascinated by a lot of it. And I think it's a testament to that is that it was very easy to communicate with her what we needed to do for each section, like that, with that hindsight, and saying, okay, this is going to happen here, this is going to happen here. And again, this goes back to the idea of the structure of the game and how you can gauge it whilst it still like offers up tension, surprise, panic, fear, like that. There were sections she did not like in terms of like being scared of them, but she got through them and like enjoyed that sort of rush of that. But yeah, she could be silly and goofy with it as well. She found like this great thing of like if you spin around in a circle and turn halfway through, like the character flops to the floor, like it's like as a child would if they were spinning around, like they just go ploomp at the floor, and we had like a fun 5 minutes of that. It was like it's a really weird detail, but it's really cool like that. But yeah, it was quite fascinating as a co-op experience, like to go through so much of it so quickly and not be frustrated. I know she plays video games, she understands how video games work, and like I said, she's into horror video games in a child sense, the stuff that is more aimed at kids. But yeah, it was like she got what we had to do. Like that wasn't the frustration I've had sometimes in sort of trying to sort of do co-op stuff like that. So yeah, it's been a wonderful experience. Still not finished it with her yet, but she's seen the end of the game anyway, but it's not a problem. But she was intrigued to sort of play it so yeah, I mean that was a major plus, to have one of my kids like be into a game like that is wonderful. And I suppose that helps, and again goes back to what I said before about Tarsia's games having that connection with a younger audience, like that, and being a gateway to darker things like that. Yeah, I mean this is probably a bit too dark for most kids, but still, it's like I'm not just advocating anyone to just get their kids to play this. It's like my daughter is very much she has a sense of the macabre, so that's fine. It was even then maybe it's a bit much, but it's like she could handle it, and I was always checking to make sure she was okay with each thing like that. I'll probably go upstairs after this and find out that she's been keeping my wife awake all night with nightmares. But again, now say this, but
to each parent's discretion, right?
Yeah, that's it. But yeah, it's good because it's just I think it was the same sort of age I went through this with my son, like the curiosity and having the right kind of things around to sort of express that. And yeah, this really does feel like that kind of game that it suited her certain sensibilities. I think she quite likes the idea of body horror as well, which this game is like full of as well. So yeah, I mean she's gonna be a great surprise when she gets to see the bits she didn't see, so like that coming up next. But yeah, she's witnessed some interesting stuff.
We'll have to have a follow-up chat where you get to report back on when she gets to see some of the rest of the stuff later on. But since you mentioned it, this is a good time for us to take a quick break. And when we come back, I might have a question or two just about like what your experience was a little bit more in depth in terms of co-op. And then we can dive into more of the spoiler side of things. So yeah, expect in the second half when we return from our break, a bit more spoilers, a lot more spoilers perhaps, but you will have a second warning about spoilers and whatnot on the tail end of our ad break. But more on that in a moment.
From Bloody FM, step into a mysterious shop where every object has a sordid tale to tell.
You have plunged so deep into the depths of despair.
Meet the antique dealer and a rotating cast of the best in horror.
I didn't believe in stuff like this. This wasn't real.
Mike Flanagan, Kate Siegel, David Desmulchin, Jocelyn Donahue, and more. The antiquarium of sinister happenings and odd goings-on. No refunds, no exchanges. Experience it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you get your podcasts.
And we're back from our break. And as I mentioned before we took the break, this is when we're going to be delving into spoilers of all kinds. So if you have not completed Reanimal, this might be a good point for you to pause and then come back to this episode later on. Even if
I mean, just to clarify, love the game. It's great. Play it, and then if you haven't, and so do that, play it, then come back, listen to the rest. But it is absolutely worth it. But yeah, it is going to be shaky territory from here.
This is when it turns into a free fire zone for spoilers and whatnot. But yeah, so one of the major things that you were talking about your experience with the game, and it really is one of the aspects that really differentiates Reanimal from some of the Little Nightmare stuff, is that this game, obviously, it can be played in single player, but also it's been designed with co-op in mind. And so you had mentioned, you getting to play through part of the game with your daughter in co-op and whatnot. And like, I guess, generally speaking, and you sort of touched upon a little bit, but like, did you find that co-op and playing with another person really added a layer to this that differentiated, I suppose, from your experience playing it in single player? Because there's naturally elements of gameplay where, you can give, you play as the brother in Reanimal, and then you can give orders to the sister, and you can have her like stand on a platform, or you can have her interact with an object while you as the brother maneuver other things in the game. Like, did you find that playing in co-op, other than, getting to share the love of horror with your daughter, like, did that add something to the experience, or did it sort of give credence to the notion of like, hey, yeah, co-op, local co-op is back, kind of a thing?
Well, I think because of the simplicity of stuff like combat, like puzzles, like most of the stuff requires two people or two characters to interact with an object. Like even going through gaps and doors, like it's very much like a they do a little whispered "come here" basically thing to each other to go through. And so those things with an AI partner, they work, they look nice, fine, but like actually having someone respond to that, it's quite cool. Like there's an agency there that wasn't there before. There's a certain section of the game as well where you do feel a bit frustrated by an AI partner because you can't communicate what you want them to do, and they don't quite work things out. But I mean, on the flip side of that, there are bits where having two people controlling characters, especially during chase sequences, can sometimes cause a little friction, because it's, especially if you've got one of the kids following you as well, it can mess up them, and you can end up failing like the end of sequences just by like half a frame basically, like, and it doesn't make sense. But I mean, there was one segment like that early on with the sniffer, like going through a door, and it's like got caught, but when it came back, it was into the next scene. So it was like, it was even the game was kind of realizing that shouldn't have happened, sort of thing, like that. So little issues there, but I think they could be smoothed out, no problem. But yeah, I think like that simplicity, and again the presentation of it all makes it very easy to communicate, what you want them to do. But and again, it helps if someone you're playing with plays video games anyway, because you can explain things in a very simple way, and because the button setup is very simple. Like on PlayStation, triangle to interact, like square to hit things, X to jump. It's that, and sneak is L2, and like running is R2. It's a very simple control setup that you know exactly what button you need for what situation. And sure, little frustrations will happen here and there, like they do with anything. It's trial and error. But yeah, I think through the game so far, like there's only been one section across AI and person, where I've had a problem, like where it's been like hard to get past, was towards the end of the orphanage sequence with the spider creature
Yeah.
that when you're tied together and you have to go, when the rubble of the surface breaks and you've got to walk along those precarious little platforms, but you can't both be on the same section or it collapses under your weight.
Yeah.
And trying to communicate that is hard with the AI because it doesn't quite always get where you want to be. And of course, the weight of one character pulls or pushes the other. And so, yeah, it was difficult to try and remember that with someone else. So even though I knew what to do the second time, somehow it was difficult again. But it really was the only section. But it was, again, not frustrating because you talk it through and you're like, okay, this is fine. So we tried this. What about if we try this? My daughter found it very funny. Kept, like, I'd tell her what to do and then I'd fall off the fucking side or something. But like that, yeah, the elder doesn't know what they're doing, sort of thing. But yeah, and I say before about like the way sequences are broken up into little sections that still feel like a whole. They're perfect for co-op as well, because you do just get those little breathers. It's like, we just have to do this bit. We've got to run from here to here and blah 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 like that, and we do it. Done. Wait a minute. Ready? Okay, we can go, sort of thing, and that's great. And even like the harpooning thing, like when you're in co-op, you have to, like, whoever's first to like interact with the boat will get the job of driving it. Like, so unlike in normally it's like one of you doing one there, she's at the front of the boat doing the light and the harpoon stuff. And so she didn't like that first, but it's like, oh, that's fine, because you can drive a boat. I tried to explain it to her. It's like, it's no different from walking around. You're having to hold down R2 to basically move forward instead of just using stick like that. And again, the way it's structured, you can communicate it well. It's not frustrating. You can say, go slow. The game's not going to punish you for being slow here. You can just wait, and the enemies will come to you, and you can spear them, and it'll be fine. I like that. And it was, I really was quite impressed with how well these moments stitched together, and was so easy to communicate. Again, it does just come down to that presentation and how well everything is translated once you understand how the game is approaching its presentation.
Yeah, for me, when I went into this game, it was one of the things where I was like, okay, is having the protagonist be a brother and sister, is that more or less just an excuse to promote the fact that this is like, you can play co-op, couch co-op, what have you? But I really felt that, I got to play this a little bit with one of my buddies in co-op, and it was the type of thing where getting to play through it in that way, it was more than just like the thematic aspect of it. Like, no, it actually like felt like some sections going back and getting to play in co-op were, I don't know, there was more to, I don't know if investment's the right way to phrase it, but it just felt like, okay, this is a game that actually like feels justified in the inclusion of this, more so than just because it matches that thematic relevance in terms of the brother and sister and whatnot. And as you were saying, like, outside of a few instances, like playing in co-op actually is preferred because of an instance like when you guys are tethered together and you got to contend with, the qualms of AI, which is that sometimes, doesn't work as entirely intended. And so getting to play through some sections like that with a friend went by a lot smoother to the degree that, like, okay, cool. I didn't have to be as frustrated in returning to this portion of the experience after I was, playing through the game for a second time. So yeah, but obviously getting to play through it with one of your kids has to be an awesome experience, just no matter what the game is, right? That notion that you can revel in your overall, your hobby, but getting to play a game that so perfectly is designed to have that sort of that option, and if anything, just like get to enhance and experience it already is quite strong in that regard. So yeah, in terms of like some of the spoilers and stuff that we were alluding to that we were going to get into, like for you, like what is one of the aspects that would technically fall under spoiler territory that really stood out to you in terms of like moments or elements of design?
So, if you were to accuse the game of like riffing on what had come before, like there's a whole central thing of a character doubling over in agony and like there being this sort of, you know, something ominous is happening and it will pay off with some great thing, which is what happens at the end of Little Nightmares. We know this. And yeah, that happens here, but it's how it happens here, again, a presentation thing and a decision thing that really make it just stand out. That is, of course, like the sheep visions, if you will, that the girl has, and which culminates in yeah. I mean, if you've seen the advertising or the front page or whatever of Reanimal, you've seen the sheep creature like that, and it's there, it's everywhere, and of course, so as a result, it's very much a where's the sheep creature? Where's that coming into it? And of course, you get these little teasers throughout the game of like a sheep basically mutating at the bottom of this well, and towards the end of the game, it literally just like we have that one final vision thing, and given what we know from Little Nightmares, the first thing, okay, so she's going to transform into a sheep creature or something, whatever. No. She vomits up the sheep creature, and it just goes off. I mean, it's like it's very alien coded in ways, but she doesn't die from it either, which is like, but which again is like a story thing, but yeah, it was just like I was expecting something like it, but not that sort of thing. And yeah, everything from that point on was just like, what the fuck? Yeah, I mean that whole end section, like with the war going on and like just the effect of whatever the fuck is going on. It becomes clearer and clearer that something is just gone very, very wrong here to do with this whole thing that they've whatever's gone in the background, and the sheep may be a part of it. And yeah, just so to carry on into spoiler zones here, it's you get a lot of like trenches and stuff. It's very World War One-esque sort of stuff.
It's a bit Death Stranding, no?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's a similar thing, definitely, in terms of what it does with the Mads bits. But yeah, it's like the soldiers, like normally the first thing is, okay, so they're going to be trying to attack us, and some do. There's like sniper sections, and like they're tense and great, and again, like easy to understand what you have to do in those sections while still being tense. But it's when they start fucking blowing their own heads off and fucking and like running, crawling at you with grenades and suicide bombing you, and it's like, and you don't understand why, and they're just doing it, and it's just like, I mean, there's that medical room later on in a bunker you go into, and they just start like dragging themselves after you, blowing themselves up, and it's just like, what is making them do this sort of thing like that? It's just constant madness. All this with the knowledge that you've got this ever mutating sheep creature out there, like that is somehow connected to you. And I mean, yeah, I know we're just pushing straight to the climax here, but it's like just. I mean, it's important just to mention that as part of this. It is just bombastic. In fact, no, I'm not going to go too far into it because I think the ending itself is so something that is worthy of discussion. But I think we're still quite early in, and there's lots of things to interpret from it. But yeah, when we talk about vehicles and violence and set pieces, like the game really does just deliver, like the end game of that. Like it really does just give you the sequence that makes the most sense for the absolute crazy nonsense you've gone through in that regard. But yeah, and just the ending being as abrupt as it is, and knowing obviously that there are like 3 more like chapters to come in the next year, does intrigue me, because that certainly worked for Little Nightmares in terms of, and 2 for having extra bits later that sort of opened up and explained bits. But what is there is really interesting. And yeah, like you mentioned very early on, about like there's a folk horror vibe to it. I mean, it's that in that finale, it is so apparent, the folk stuff, like just the ritualistic nature of everything. How when you play the game again, how much of that like shines through. Yeah, I mean, and that bit right at the end, where they sort of show the ritual stuff, like yeah, it's satanic stuff, like in the best way possible. Like it is just such amazing imagery, to see, and it just justifies everything that's come before it, in terms of like how messed up this place is. The fact that they lived here anyway, and something's gone wrong they've had to come back to it, and they want to get out of it. It's like crazy. Like, yeah, that finale is like, when I talk about Inside, it was like, it reminded me of that, just because of how like I did not expect this from the finale of this game, like that, and yet it's still to end with some ambiguity, which you get to figure out a bit as you go. But yeah, it was, the ending was fantastic, and yeah, like, not to say that stuff that comes before isn't, but I think it all works to that end goal, like, and those visions and the difference that all makes compared to how that worked out for Little Nightmares just feels so much grander, so much more devastating. Like, it feels impactful on the world in a way that was quite self-contained in Little Nightmares. So yeah, something else.
This is the thing with Reanimal that I think ultimately is what allows it to, I don't know if it like allows it to further differentiate itself from what came before it in terms of Tarsier Studios' portfolio, but more importantly, like, I think that Reanimal serves as like proof positive that Tarsier Studios' like unique brand of weirdness is continually being justified in terms of like the creative decisions that they're making. Like, we've talked previously about, we love games, and specifically like horror media in general, that like, yeah, this is stuff that prides itself on getting real weird and getting real nasty. But sometimes, and almost like a majority of the time, you play stuff that prides itself on that, and it's like, yeah, this is weird for the sake of being weird. But like, to kind of what you're saying with Reanimal, like, this is a game and a world that is continually getting weirder, more grotesque. I would say even so much as like leaning more into the body horror side of things than any of their previous games. And yet, like, there's this thematic resonance that really allows it to feel like it is proper for this type of world. It's like, yeah, that first chapter of the, it's like, yeah, somewhat familiar to what they've done before. It is very weird. It is dark, but the fact that they're able to kind of like just continually have these aspects, whether it's World War I trenches or whether it's, your sister ends up vomiting this goat monster, sheep monster that ends up growing like spidery, spindly legs out of it. Like, it all feels very fitting for this world. And I found that like by the end of Reanimal, nothing that occurred, as grotesque and as shocking as it was, nothing felt out of place with the world that had been established there within. Like, it all feels like this is a place that no matter what is included, ultimately we're going to circle back to the relevance of this. And I think that, like, that ties into the orphanage. It ties into revisiting that village that has been flooded, and ultimately, what we end up learning about not only the sister, but just like starting to hint at like reasons for why these things are happening. It all just feels like it is greatly in service of something other than just like, hey, let's get some like great shock value out of this fucked up thing. And I think that that's probably the best compliment that I could pay to the approach here, to the storytelling, is that, it's for something greater than just like the buzz, if you will, surrounding Reanimal.
So before we get too close to the end, I want to get to my favorite part of the game, in terms of like being a horror game, and that is the aquatic section that you get. I mean, there's a whole thing with like the most open part of the game is like this puzzle of like shooting this giant horse skull monster, that's
Yeah.
roaming around the sea like that, and yeah, you don't have to interact with it at all. You just the first time you get to really interact with it is to blow the fuck up like that, and it just as you get close to it, you are expecting like a bait out as you see it still there, and it just sinks to the ocean, and basically you end up with this blockage area and on a ship where you can't get through, and there's this weird whale that's blind. In terms of like the whys of anything, this is probably the least reasonable, I think, suppose, thing in the game. In terms of like, I don't know why the logic was, oh, sure, we need to bring an eye to this whale, sort of thing, but you do, and the logic dictates that hey, we just like murdered a horse-skulled creature down there, so why not? Let's go and get his eye, sort of thing. And yeah, you basically go into like old school diver suits and like plunge down into the ocean, and the treacliness of being underwater and the audio work and just oh my god, I honest to god, that was the most scared I was in the entire game. Like I know we don't tend to focus on that side of things so much with horror games, weirdly, for this podcast, but that was like I genuinely like wanted to get out of there like as quick as I could. Like that, it's the under the ocean thing, sure, but it's not even like it's the deepness, but it was just like it gave an extra thing to that section, and yeah, I loved everything about it. It's like again, it's really brief when you think about it, but it feels like it takes forever, like just because of like the unbearable feeling of being down there for too long, and nothing went wrong really either. I didn't fail that section or anything like that, but probably because we're so fucking laser first focused on getting out of it. But it was it was like intense, and even that late in the game to suddenly have a moment where I was like, Jesus, like that. It was something else, which is not long before we have the whole vomiting up a lamb sort of thing. So it's like this game knows how to sort of go do its peaks and troughs well.
But I think that is probably again like the strongest indication of studio growth is the fact that you can have these moments that are so memorable. And that instance that you just mentioned is probably 10 minutes or less. I would say even saying that section is 10 minutes long is probably a bit of a stretch. And because of the things that you mentioned, the term like it being something that really spends its time establishing a sense of space, establishing an environment, whether it's visually, whether it's the sound design there, like it's making this feel distinctly different from the rest of the experience up until that point. To the degree that, again, like it's a section that is so incredibly nerve wracking. And as I mentioned, like it's probably less than 10 minutes long, if that. And it's not terribly outside the realm of what you've already done in the game from a gameplay, like player feedback side of things, which I think, again, like further speaks to the importance of elements that can make familiar gameplay be remarkable in a way that you can't say for a lot of other games because of the fact that it's like, okay, what does that section entail? You're walking through that area and then you get a chase sequence and it's very brief. However, the fact of, again, like the framing of it, sound design, the fact that it plays with the lighting in a way that, a majority of what ends up chasing you is obscured for at least half of that sort of sequence. I think that just further speaks to, again, like a studio that has very clearly learned a lot from that which came before it. And it ends up making something that otherwise in the hands of another studio might be like, hey, cool, this is exactly what I expected this to be. Whereas here, you have, more than a handful of moments that, like we don't always highlight how scary something is, but this is a scary as shit game for something that from a cursory glance, like just kind of seems like more of the same almost, but ends up being anything but.
Yeah, I mean, there's all types of horror. Like we said, the body horror of it is quite like shocking the first time you see it, and in terms of just where it happens and how it happens. That whole warfare trench thing, like, is just like that is the darkest section of the entire game. Just in terms of what happens and how it happens, just and it's not even like it's super graphic. It's still that stylized thing, but done in a way that's just like, oh my god, like honestly, the first time one of the soldiers just blows their own head off, it's like, oh,
Yeah.
okay, like that. It's like, and again, coming after what we've seen, it's like it shouldn't be shocking, but it's because you've seen something absurd, that happen, and then it's followed up with something that feels a bit more real, and it's like, yeah, oof, okay, yeah, that's it. And again, this is the thing that really differentiates this game, from Tarsia's previous work, is that there are moments that just feel more real and more uncomfortable like that in terms of the violence, and because I don't it still has that look of like someone has like intricately placed a bunch of miniatures and stop motion work them, but they've done it this time. There's a bit more reality to it, and it feels a bit, it's like the difference between like Disney's Pinocchio and Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio, in terms of
Right.
like you can tell the same story and have very very different approaches, sort of thing. It's have a darkness there, but yeah, it is just fantastic. I mean, I don't want to go into too much more, just because
Yeah.
I think there's plenty to say. Like I said, the monster design is great. The way the game is paced is fantastic, and yeah, there are bits we haven't gone into, but yeah, again, there's very much be explaining the same things. Experiencing them is the best thing about it. I will, of course, shout out the composers, I think, which is Christian Vasselbring, Jacob Carlson, and Stefan Almquist, who've just, again, do such fantastic work here with terms of how they put the music across and where they put the music across. I mean, for a game that is very much about presentation and like presenting the player with like the spectacle, everything just clicks together so well, and you have to have a good soundtrack for that.
And additionally, not to say we're cutting our conversation short, but might have a future conversation about this game with some of those involved in the works later on.
Oh, and probably about when the different DLCs come out as well, because they'll expand on the story, and obviously they're well paced out. I think it's a spring, summer and winter thing, wasn't it? But I'm very intrigued to see what extra they add to the story, because, like, as I said, even replaying it, there is so much about it that's really fascinating, and especially because it has got this sort of folk horror base to it. That I love the idea of it. Like I said, there's just so much more to it in terms of like the world, because it's like more open. It feels more like interesting to learn about, and it is very much the trick that Playdead did well with Inside, where it's like there's a wider world out here and there's something going on with it, and you are kind of witnessing it as you go by. You don't fully understand what that is about it, and trajectory wise they're very similar, and that's great, because Inside is like one of my favorite horror games. So that's a huge compliment I can pay to Reanimal. It is like that, and like I said earlier in the podcast, it's kind of like my Amnesia Rebirth thing, where it's like, no, this is the game for me that I get from the studio, that really connects with me in a way that the popular one that came before, not as much. Like, I appreciate, but not this way. Not this is the game that does it, and it will be the game where other people will look around and go, they're just doing the same thing again, and like it will make me angry. Like, it's not.
Well, plus I think, it further is an example of why it's best to not overly explain your game's world, right? The fact that you can even have this possibility of, DLC or just, additional story content in general for something, because the majority of the time it's like you get to the end of a game and it's like, shit, I have zero questions and I might have enjoyed that, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time thinking about it afterwards because everything's been answered. Whereas here, again, as we chatted about early in the episode, it's just this notion of like, you create these worlds that are visually intriguing. And even if you are going to include voiceover work for the first time for your series of games or for a studio, it's like, you don't have to have this heavy-handed brush, if you will, of that inclusion. You can like use it at these very specific key moments to emphasize and to heighten what already worked. But here you're going to be able to do so in like a different manner. But yeah, as we've mentioned, this is not the last conversation we're going to have, not only about Reanimal, but who's to say who will have joining us to chat about it in the future. But yeah, I guess it's probably a fitting point to kind of like wrap up our chat here with this. And as we said, we will be revisiting this game in the future.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but yeah, that's going to do it for our chat this week covering Reanimal from Tarsier Studios. And as I mentioned in the beginning of the episode during the housekeeping portion, be sure to give our episode of Horror Bites last week a listen as we kick off our brand new theme for the month of February, that being 9 to 5 horrors. But as always, until next time, my friend, it's a pleasure chatting horror with you for Safe Room.
Okay, my man. Until the next time.
Thank you for listening to this week's main feed episode of Safe Room. If you've enjoyed our horrifying discussions, please take a moment to rate and review the show on your preferred podcast platform, as this helps us immensely in ensuring that the show continues to grow. For any and all show updates and additional content, you can follow Safe Room on all of our socials, which are linked in the episode notes, at Safe Room Pod. And finally, you can send any and all emails to saferoompod@gmail.com. Thank you again for listening, and we'll see you guys next time.
Watch The Toxic Avenger now on Screambox. The radioactive superhero that's certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes is available to watch now from the comfort of your home. Bloody FM listeners get a special introductory offer by going to bit.ly/ToxyFM. That's bit.ly/ToxieFM for a special offer on Screambox.
Sometimes you gotta do something.